Good evening, and welcome to Economic Perspectives. I'm your host, Sarah Chen. Tonight we're tackling a question that sits at the heart of many socio-economic debates. Is a strong middle class truly essential for a healthy, thriving economy? In an era of significant economic transformation, marked by technological advancements and shifts in global trade, understanding the role of the middle class has never been more pertinent. Joining us to dissect this complex issue are two distinguished experts. Dr. Ben Carter, an economist specializing in labor markets and income inequality, who argues in favor of the middle class as a cornerstone of economic health, and Ms. Evelyn Reed, a financial analyst with deep insights into investment and market growth, who presents a perspective emphasizing other crucial economic drivers. We'll begin with opening statements from each of our guests, followed by a period of rebuttal and discussion, and conclude with their closing remarks. Dr. Carter, would you please begin?
Thank you, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here. My position is unequivocal. A thriving, financially secure middle class is not merely beneficial. It is the absolute bedrock of a healthy, dynamic, and sustainable economy. Without a strong middle class, the entire economic structure becomes unstable and less prosperous for everyone in the long run. Firstly, and perhaps most crucially, the middle class functions as the primary engine of consumer demand. This segment of the population possesses the necessary disposable income to purchase goods and services beyond basic necessities. Their spending fuels aggregate demand, which in turn drives business revenues, encourages production, and stimulates job creation across various sectors. A shrinking or struggling middle class directly translates to reduced consumer spending, leading to economic stagnation, or even contraction. Secondly, a robust middle class is vital for social and political stability. When a large portion of the population feels economically secure and perceives opportunities for advancement, social cohesion is strengthened. This reduces the likelihood of social unrest and political extremism, fostering a predictable and trustworthy environment. Such stability is absolutely essential for encouraging long-term business investment and sustainable economic planning. Conversely, high levels of inequality and a squeezed middle class can breed resentment, instability, and short-sighted political decisions that harm the economy. Thirdly, the middle class is a critical source of human capital. Families in this group typically prioritize and invest heavily in education and skills development for their children. This investment cultivates the skilled workforce that a modern, knowledge-based economy requires to innovate, compete globally, and maintain high productivity levels. Finally, let's not overlook the role of the middle class in entrepreneurship and the national tax base. Many small and medium-sized enterprises are started by individuals from middle-class backgrounds, bringing innovation and creating jobs. Furthermore, they contribute a substantial portion of the tax revenue needed to fund essential public services like infrastructure, healthcare, and education, all of which underpin economic activity. Therefore, viewing the health of the middle class as secondary, or merely one factor among many, is a grave mistake. Its erosion poses a direct and significant threat to our overall economic prosperity and future stability.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. Ms. Reed, your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Ben, for outlining that perspective. While I certainly acknowledge the importance of the middle class and agree that widespread prosperity is a desirable outcome, I must argue that labeling it as asterisk, the essential component for a healthy economy, is an oversimplification, potentially diverting focus from other critical drivers. My core argument is that a modern, globally integrated economy relies on a constellation of factors, and elevating the middle class above all others can be analytically misleading and lead to ineffective policies. Firstly, let's consider the primary engines of long-term economic growth: innovation, technological advancement, productivity gains, and capital investment. These factors increase an economy's capacity to produce goods and services efficiently. While a domestic market is helpful, these drivers are often spurred by factors beyond the purchasing power of the local middle class, such as research and development funding, a favorable regulatory environment for businesses, access to venture capital, and a culture of entrepreneurship that might exist across different income levels. Focusing solely on middle-class demand might neglect the crucial supply-side elements that create wealth in the first place. Secondly, policies designed specifically to bolster the middle class, while well-intentioned, can sometimes have unintended negative consequences. For instance, certain forms of wealth redistribution, excessive regulation, or particular tax structures might discourage investment, reduce incentives for risk-taking, or hinder labor market flexibility, ultimately slowing down overall economic growth and potentially harming job creation, even for the middle class itself. We need to be cautious that efforts to protect one group don't inadvertently stifle the dynamism of the entire economy. Thirdly, we operate in a deeply globalized world. For many economies, export markets are as important, if not more important, than domestic consumption. Foreign investment also plays a critical role in providing capital and creating jobs. A strong global presence and competitiveness can compensate for periods of weaker domestic middle-class demand, providing resilience. Overemphasizing the domestic middle class might lead to protectionist tendencies that ultimately harm global trade relationships and reduce overall economic potential. Finally, the term middle class itself can be ambiguous and difficult to define consistently across countries, or even over time. Does it refer to income, lifestyle, education, or occupation? Perhaps focusing on broader, more measurable goals like reducing absolute poverty, increasing economic mobility across all income levels, fostering widespread opportunity, or simply maximizing sustainable GDP growth would provide a clearer and more effective framework for economic policy. In conclusion, while a prosperous middle class is a positive feature of any economy, it's not the single essential pillar. We need a balanced approach that fosters innovation, encourages investment, embraces global opportunities, and promotes overall economic dynamism.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. We now move into the rebuttal phase. Dr. Carter, you have the first opportunity to respond to Ms. Reed's points.
Thank you. Ms. Reed raises some important points about innovation and investment, but I believe her perspective downplays the crucial interdependence between these factors and a strong middle class. Innovation doesn't happen in a vacuum. It needs a market. While export markets are significant, a stable and predictable domestic market, largely driven by middle-class consumers, provides a crucial foundation for businesses to test, refine, and scale new products and services. Furthermore, the social stability I mentioned earlier, which is fostered by a secure middle class, is precisely the environment where long-term R&D investment feels safest and most likely to yield returns. Regarding globalization, while international trade is vital, over-reliance on exports can make an economy vulnerable to global economic shocks or geopolitical tensions. A strong domestic demand base, supported by the middle class, provides essential economic resilience and buffers against external volatility. It's not an either-or situation. Both are important, but a strong domestic core is fundamental. Finally, the argument that supporting the middle class stifles dynamism is questionable. Investing in education and skills, key middle-class priorities, directly fuels the innovation Ms. Reed champions. Policies that ensure fair wages and job security can actually boost productivity and loyalty, rather than hindering flexibility. Neglecting the middle class doesn't create dynamism. It creates precarity and ultimately weakens the human capital base needed for sustained growth.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. Ms. Reed, your rebuttal?
Thank you. Dr. Carter emphasizes demand, but historically, significant leaps in prosperity have often been driven by supply-side revolutions, the Industrial Revolution, the Tech Revolution. These were fueled by invention, investment, and productivity breakthroughs, which then created new markets and eventually benefited wider sections of society, including the middle class. Focusing primarily on sustaining existing demand patterns can sometimes miss the transformative potential of supply-side disruption, We need policies that encourage the creation of new wealth, not just the circulation of existing wealth. Regarding stability, while extreme instability is clearly detrimental, a certain degree of economic dynamism involves change, sometimes disruptive change. An excessive focus on protecting the current status of the middle class can lead to economic rigidity. Think of resistance to automation or new business models. While painful for those affected in the short term, these changes are often necessary for long-term productivity growth and competitiveness, which ultimately benefits the economy as a whole. And my concern about specific policies remains. For example, high corporate taxes intended to fund middle-class programs might drive investment overseas. Stringent labor regulations might make businesses hesitant to hire. The link between pro-middle-class policies and positive overall economic outcomes isn't always direct or guaranteed. The design of those policies is critical. We must ensure that in trying to support one group, we don't inadvertently damage the broader mechanisms of growth and opportunity.
Thank you both. Let's delve deeper into some specific areas. A question for both of you. How do taxation policies impact the middle class versus overall economic growth? Is there often a conflict between designing tax systems to support the middle class and designing them to maximize investment and growth?
That's a central tension. From my perspective, progressive taxation, where higher earners pay a larger percentage, is crucial. It provides the revenue for public investments in education, infrastructure, and healthcare that benefit everyone, particularly the middle class, and create a more skilled workforce and efficient economy. Targeted tax credits for middle-income families can also directly boost their disposable income, fueling the demand I spoke of. While excessively high rates on corporations or capital gains could deter investment, finding the right balance is key. A system perceived as fair also enhances social stability.
I see a potential conflict more clearly. While fairness is important, economic growth is heavily influenced by investment decisions. Taxes on corporate profits and capital gains directly impact the return on investment. If these taxes are too high relative to other countries, capital may flow elsewhere, reducing domestic investment, job creation, and ultimately wage growth, potentially harming the middle class in the long run. Consumption taxes, while potentially regressive, if not designed carefully, can be less distortionary to investment decisions. The focus should be on a tax system that is competitive and efficient in raising revenue, rather than primarily using it as a tool for redistribution, which might have negative growth implications.
Another crucial aspect is social mobility. Is it more important for economic health to have a very large, stable middle class, or to have high levels of mobility, allowing people to easily move between income brackets, even if the middle class itself is smaller or more fluid? Ms. Reed?
I would argue that high economic mobility is arguably more important than the static size of the middle class at any given moment. Mobility implies opportunity. If people believe they can improve their circumstances through hard work, education, and risk-taking, it fosters dynamism and aspiration across the entire economy. A society with high mobility is likely more adaptable and innovative. Focusing solely on preserving the existing middle class could inadvertently create barriers to entry for those trying to move up, or stifle the dynamism that allows for upward mobility in the first place.
Dr. Carter?
I believe mobility and a strong middle class are complementary, not mutually exclusive. High mobility is indeed crucial, but it's often into and out of a stable middle class. A large middle class provides the quote, rungs on the ladder. The jobs, educational opportunities, and community structures that facilitate upward movement. If the middle class itself is hollowed out, mobility becomes much harder. The distance between the bottom and the top becomes too vast. Furthermore, a secure middle class provides a safety net that encourages risk-taking, including the risks associated with striving for upward mobility. You need both, the opportunity to climb and a solid place to stand.
One final question before closing statements. Considering the rise of automation and artificial intelligence, how might the traditional role and even the definition of the middle class change? And how does this impact its economic importance? Dr. Carter?
This is a profound challenge. Automation could displace many traditional middle-skill, middle-income jobs. The definition might shift away from specific occupations towards skills like critical thinking, creativity, and emotional intelligence, areas where humans currently outperform AI. Its importance, however, might even increase. We'll need robust social safety nets and massive investment in retraining and lifelong learning. Policies often supported and funded by a strong middle-class tax base to manage this transition. Without a mechanism to ensure the gains from automation are shared broadly, creating a new form of middle-class security, we risk unprecedented inequality and social instability, which would undoubtedly harm the economy.
Ms. Reed?
Automation and I represent a massive potential boost to productivity, which is the ultimate source of wealth creation. While the transition poses challenges, resisting it would be economically detrimental. The focus should be on fostering adaptation, encouraging investment in new technologies, ensuring labor markets are flexible enough to allow workers to shift to new roles, and equipping people with future-proof skills. Rather than trying to preserve a specific definition of the middle class, we should focus on ensuring the economy generates new opportunities, and that individuals are empowered to seize them. The importance lies in overall economic dynamism and individual adaptability, not in maintaining a specific societal structure.
Thank you both for that engaging discussion. We now turn to closing statements. Ms. Reed, please summarize your position.
Thank you. Tonight, I've argued that while the middle class is an important part of a healthy society, it is not the single essential driver of economic prosperity in our complex, globalized world. True economic health relies fundamentally on innovation, productivity growth, capital investment, and global competitiveness. An excessive focus on the middle class risks overlooking these primary engines or enacting policies that inadvertently stifle them. We need a balanced perspective that acknowledges multiple interdependent factors. Our policies should aim to foster broad economic dynamism, enhance competitiveness, reduce poverty, and promote opportunity and mobility for all, rather than narrowly targeting one specific segment.
Thank you, Ms. Reed. Dr. Carter, your closing statement.
Thank you. I maintain that a strong and vibrant middle class is fundamentally essential for a healthy economy. It provides the critical consumer demand that fuels businesses, the social and political stability necessary for investment, the educated workforce required for innovation, and a significant portion of the tax base funding public goods. To neglect the middle class, to allow it to shrink or become insecure, is to undermine the very foundations of sustainable economic growth and shared prosperity. Supporting the middle class through fair wages, access to quality education and healthcare, and progressive tax policies is not merely a social objective. It is a vital economic imperative for ensuring long-term stability and dynamism.
Thank you, Dr. Carter, and thank you, Ms. Reed, for a truly insightful and thought-provoking debate on this critical issue. You've given us much to consider regarding the complex interplay between the middle class and overall economic health. Thank you to our viewers for joining Economic